Because I'm an auditor, I have to talk about that regulatory compliance. I already touched about it a little bit, but there is the Privacy Act of 1974, which again is that individuals have the right to know what information is being used and how that information is being protected. There are regulations such as GDPR, CCPA, which is actually now CPRA, which is those regulations for privacy in the EU and California to then protect those rights. Um, Also, within the audit realm, there are new global II standards that actually rolled out this year. And what's really cool about these is that they specifically call out the need of internal audit departments to actually have these technologies, these data analytics and AI technologies used for their audit procedures. So a lot of those industries and internal audit teams that I mentioned that maybe not have been as mature are now required to then reassess their audit plans and their audit methodologies to kind of start leveraging these new technologies for their benefit and for the company's benefit as well. And then APRA, that's the American Privacy Rights Act, which is upcoming. We'll see if that does come out, when that does come out in the future, to then basically what that's going to do is allow individuals to access their data upon request for the American Privacy Rights Act. All right, so then now we can get into some use cases that I can share because we have all of our ducks in the row. We have our I's dotted, our T's crossed. And so before we get into specific use cases, again, for the folks that are new to audit specifically, I want to quickly go over the audit phases where you do see these data analytic and AI technologies being leveraged. So first off, in audit, you have a planning phase. And this is where you go out and you gather all of the information about the different departments, the company as a whole, the different departments or areas that you are going to audit or you plan on auditing to just understand, you know, all of the different aspects, policies, procedures, standards, etc. And then what you're doing in that planning phase, again, is like thinking about what specifically you're going to audit, what audit tests that you're going to perform, what internal controls exist, and then kind of build out that audit plan and move forward to fieldwork. And fieldwork is basically the phase where you are performing that analysis. A lot of we'll see I'll talk kind of about the progression of data analytics and AI, right? So when audit teams were first leveraging these new technologies, a lot of the data analytics were being applied specifically just to field work because that's where all of like the testing is involved. But what's really cool is that we're now seeing, you know, with the onset of AI, that these new techniques can be applied to these other areas. So that's actually really cool. All right, and then lastly, the reporting phase. That's basically where you take all of the findings that you had collected during your fieldwork and then putting it into a report for the audit board or whatever other stakeholders that you are presenting to. All right, now on to the real world examples, which I'm sure everybody is here to learn about especially. So again, with those audit phases in that planning phase, you have what are called risk assessments. And so with risk assessments, again, you're trying to figure out what areas within the company are especially critical and need kind of a closer eye or a closer testing to make sure that things are running like the well-oiled machine. And within here, one thing that you can do with your risk assessments is to identify specific systems with that are high risk to the company, right? So with that progression that I talked about, it used to be a very manual process where you went out to the businesses and kind of talked to all of management of all of the different departments and kind of talk about, what systems that they use, and you would get a more, I guess, opinionated answer as to whether or not their systems were critical to the company. And of course, everybody thinks that their systems are critical to the company, as they should. However, once you progress more into data analytics, then you can use data that the systems are generating to identify whether or not they are critical to the company. So for the data that you can look at things like access logs, incident reports, and compliance standards. And for this, say you're looking at access logs and a certain system is, being accessed or being used monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, especially, right? So if these are being used very constantly, those are absolutely very critical to the organization. Progress even further in with the AI technologies that I'm starting to see people leverage for these risk assessments is to kind of automate this process, in that they'll send out kind of self-assessments and collect the data from these self-assessments, gather that data, and then using usually what I'm seeing right now is people are leveraging Copilot as a Gen AI tool within audit teams. And so they'll prompt, say, Copilot, they'll give it all of these self-assessments and kind of ask it, what systems are critical depending on how they answer that self-assessment. So that's kind of the progression that you see with the risk assessments. All right, so with revenue fraud, this is actually where I was first introduced to data analytics and these cool technologies back when I was first IT auditor. And so basically, we all know fraud happens on your credit card statement or whatnot. There's ways that you need to be able to flag this. What you do heavily as an auditor when I first started out was performing what's called Benford's Law. And so basically with that, it's basic, it's called a first digits law. That's what it's called. And so when you have a random set of numbers, you have a specific distribution of the first digits within those numbers. So say you are measuring blades of grass, right? Or in this instance, you're looking at revenue transactions or sales transactions. You'll see that distribution starting out number 1 as the leading digit is the most, and then it will kind of decrease down to number 9 as the most, or as the leading digit, excuse me, right? So what we did was we kind of just took all of the sales transactions and put them into that frequency distribution plot and saw if there were any spikes. Say in the number 7, right? Number 7 as the leading digit was as high or higher than number 1. We would assume that something went wrong or that there might be some kind of fraud. People flubbed the numbers, as we would say in the audit field. So then another thing to point out there, I say assume because there could be reasons why potentially that there are these anomalies that are taking place. So as an auditor, you need to deep dive and to kind of apply your professional judgment into those types of areas to basically go back to management and ask like, oh, we identified this as a potential risk or a potential outlier finding, etc. And then to ask, were you aware of this? Do you know what's going on, etc. To then identify whether or not there is an issue there. progressing on to the application directly to AI, much like with the risk assessments, there are ways to then just feed all of your transactions, your sales transactions into, again, I'll mention Copilot because that is what I'm seeing a lot of the audit teams using. So you do, input all of your sales transactions, you feed that into your Copilot, and then you think about what prompt that you're going to give it. So you give it a prompt saying, you have a list of sales transactions. Can you please identify any potential fraud that may be existing? And it will go do its magic. And then again, of course, if it does flag any anomalies or potential fraud, you do need to still take those to management to then verify whether or not that is the case. Another thing is with expense fraud. So this is very similar to revenue fraud. It's just there's different things that you can look at, right? So specifically with expense fraud, again, this is like if you work at a company, say you go have dinner with a client and they're able to then repay you for that dinner, or you're buying office supplies and they allow you, some kind of reimbursement for that. Then typically what you do is then you submit an expense report. You have to show your receipts, any supporting documentation, etc. That's the data that's being used to then analyze to flag certain things that might be happening that would identify potential fraud. So within this realm, some things that I have seen that I have previously tested specifically for are management sign off. So there are times where management, it's required for management to sign off for you to get that reimbursement. That's one of those internal controls that are specifically being tested for. So you can look at that either analytically, you can build out some kind of query to flag that, or with Copilot, with AI, you're able to create a prompt that would flag something that doesn't have a management sign off. Another thing that we would look at is threshold abuse. And with that, there has been times where, say, you have expenses, and if you have an expense that is below a certain threshold, say $25, then you wouldn't need to have an extra sign off, or, that would just be automatically reimbursed to you. What we've seen is that, unfortunately, sometimes this does get abused, and you will see a lot of transactions, say, from one specific individual that meets just below that threshold, meaning that they're just continuously automatically getting reimbursed for things that might not meet the qualifications for getting reimbursed, right? They might be going out and getting pedicures or something and, getting reimbursed for pedicures, which typically is not allowed. And that that gets to the last one that's on here, those non-allowed expenses. So what I used to do from a data analytic perspective here is that I would write queries that would flag specific words that were identified in those policies and procedures as things that are not allowed. And that then would, of course, flag different things. We would also flag things like miscellaneous or other, to then have to deep dive into looking at receipts and making sure that those were appropriate. And then, of course, with the progression into AI technologies, you can do a similar thing with, say, Copilot, and just give it a prompt saying, here is, say, credit card statements for all the employees. Can you please flag anything that might look suspicious? So that's what we're seeing there for expense fraud stuff. There's also some tests that you can do with vendors. It's vendor disbursement fraud. Sometimes there are instances where a vendor will have the same address as an employee, and that is just, that you're sending, money to this vendor, which is actually an employee. So you want to, just make sure that that's not happening. So that's a very simple check. You're just comparing different addresses or maybe even different names against each other. More advanced technologies, I've seen flag not one-to-one address matches, but vicinity matches, right? So if something's like just slightly off of the same location, then you can deep dive into that to kind of make sure those aren't these vendor disbursement fraud situations. Another one of my favorites is with access controls. This one also should be fairly simple, but this is internal control that within my audit career, I always found flags. And so basically with this one, we're identifying any unnecessary or unapproved access to your systems. And the thought behind this specifically is that if you are terminated from a company, you should no longer have access to those systems. And you'd be surprised on how many employees that were terminated from the company still had access to those systems because the internal control specifically failed in those instances, right? So from a data analytic perspective, there's tests there where you can match the HR employee list, there's termination dates, and you would then just match those up against, say, your Active Directory or your user list from specific systems to then see if those dates matched, if people still have access or not. Also, another thing here that people might miss or not think about are people that transfer within the company. So if you're transferring, you might not typically need access to all of the systems that you needed to before, right? So I finance into, say, like supply chain or HR, right? You might, as an HR professional, you might not need access to the finance systems anymore. So within those transfers, you want to make sure that all of those access to the financial systems that particular employee doesn't have access to anymore. And then, of course, with breaches, you want to make sure that there's no unapproved access. This one, I see where AI technologies leverage even more because these are those one-off, very odd situations. Say, an employee has been on vacation or is on maternity leave, but they specifically have in their rules and regulations that you're not allowed to sign in to your systems, but there is flagged access to those systems per that employee account, right? And so that could signify that that employee account got breached or that that employee didn't, follow the rules and signed into their account while they were on vacation. So again, with those, you want to take those potential issues back to management and ask, were you aware of the situation, and verify whether or not that is an audit finding. I think this might be the last one that I have per slides. I have, there's lots of things that we can talk about if anybody has any questions. But the last one I have here is with change management. So basically what you can look at are changes within system, like the system code changes. There's lots of internal controls and best practices that need to be in place here. A big one being that these changes should be developed and moved into production by somebody separate. right? You don't want people that are, making changes in production. That's definitely a no-no. And also you don't want somebody to develop and test their own code and then migrate that into production. There have been times where people take advantage of that and they write their own malicious code, which then gets put into production. And then I have a specific example where they were sending, like just pennies on the dollar to their own accounts. That might sound familiar to you, the movie Office Space. That particular breach was inspired by the Office Space. I think it was in Virginia that happened. But yeah, that actually happened where there was an employee that made their own changes. They did it directly in production. And yeah, we're sending, I think it was like the tax amount or something like that to themselves. So definitely you want to make sure that they're developed and approved by somebody different. That's called segregation of duties, and that things aren't being developed in production. Here, again, with the progression between data analytics and AI, you can either create a query that then flags that against, a list of management approvers, etc. Or you can feed all of that information into, say, Copilot and flag any potential issues there. All right, so I don't know where we are on time. Dabika already mentioned that is my LinkedIn Learning course, and I shared that I do have a more audit-focused audit course coming out soon. And now I'll thank everyone again. Thank you, Dabika and Sudha, for allowing me to present to y'all today. And I'll ask if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. That was so interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking of all the ways like, wow, this could be totally automated by AI. And so much of what you're talking about, it just seems like it's like ripe for AI. I think Sudha said that. The the more patterns there are with the numbers, right? It's ripe for AI and a lot of what you're talking about. So I think we have about two questions right now. Um, Sudha said, in my AI ethics classes, I have taught about GDPR and privacy by design or differential privacy, so some students are familiar with it. Do you see companies using privacy by the design architectures? Does it affect the data analytics when you do the audits?
Sorry, Monica, can you stop share so we can see your
Oh
face?
yeah, I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Let me. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to look at that again.
Is it okay if I just ask the question because
Yeah,
other?
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah. Can you please restate
Yeah.
the question?
So you mentioned GDPR, and I remembered in my classes when we discussed GDPR, one of the topics that I've taught is about this concept called privacy by design. So data is compartmentalized across different departments within the company.
Yes.
And so my
Yes.
question was, when you do auditing, do you see that, or it's possible that there's a copy of the data that the customer has not given permission anymore by GDPR is actually sitting somewhere else in marketing because
Yeah,
privacy by
that's a
design
really
is
good
not.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the audit departments themselves are actually an independent entity from the company. Right. So we are, depending on how the companies are set up, you can have its own like parent and sister company, or you're considered a third line of defense to maintain that independence. Because when you are testing everyone, you want um, that independent advice as to whether or not you are, abiding by certain laws, regulations, or being as effective as you can, right? So that's one thing that's important. With systems and what you are asking about with a privacy by design, in respect to where we're working in right now with that AI environment, that's where Copilot comes into play. And I think that's why I'm seeing most audit departments leveraging Copilot because of the fact that Copilot has what is it called? It's a work and a personal mode, but I forget what it's called. It's called work and I forget what the other one's called, but there is a specific work mode that when that is flagged and turned on, anything that you're feeding into it is it in its own environment, and it's also not being used to then retrain the model. So that in itself is its own eco environment. Nobody else has access to it. And it's extra secure because it's not being used to retrain the models, which is super important because a lot of these ways that we're seeing audit departments leverage AI is, say, within that risk assessment planning phase, where they will feed in prior audit reports, which are very sensitive proprietary information. And so you do not want those to be exposed to others outside the company. So that work mode definitely is a secure environment. And I think why most audit departments are leveraging that technology specifically. I hope that answers your question, Sudha.
Yes, yes, it does. I was not familiar with the different modes in Copilot. So, I mean, even if the company is not using Copilot, having the AI technology to allow different modes is very smart. So then it makes sense then. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
helpful.
absolutely. Great question.
And we have another question from Ananya, and that is for AI auditing, do they vary across industries like fintech, healthcare, etc.?
Yes and no. So again, what you're doing is from an audit perspective, you're basically testing that the company and the employees within the company are following the rules. And those rules can be based on those regulatory requirements. So those regulatory requirements are definitely vary by industry. But the way that you test it, right? You're testing, do you meet XYZ requirements? So kind of the overarching purpose or goal is the same. It's just exactly those kind of like business configurations, business requirements, case statements, whatever you want to call the specific elements or configurations that you're trying to flag. Great question.
I have a related question. Some industries like healthcare or finance have more compliance rules, and so
Mhm.
they must be following them. Like I've heard that there's a discipline in looking for compliance when they look for risk, and
Mhm.
there are some other industries which don't have that. So do you see that difference in the data itself? Like how, when you go access the data, is it organized for risk assessment in finance and healthcare compared to some other industry?
I would say that the companies that are in heavily regulated industries are more organized from a data perspective. Organized. You do still run into data quality issues across the board. That does not change. But I think because of how regulated and how much they are required to be audited. So, say like financial and healthcare, they have their own internal audit departments, which audit to make sure that you're following the rules before the external auditors come in and also make sure that you're following the rules, right? So, internal audit is kind of, that entity that makes sure that everyone is working the way that they should before the the more serious auditors, I suppose, if you want to call it that, before the big test comes into play.
I had one more question.
Yes.
The great talk. Are there any standard tools that have been used this far? I mean, I know you have been talking about Copilot and things like that, but until the AI is becoming so popular, what tools or softwares have been used? Like I think you were talking about soft detection or the number pattern analysis of the first number and things like that. So these must have been codified in some form in some software, right? What
Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
what softwares exist like that?
Yeah, so it, of course, it depends on what team you're on and how mature your audit processes are. I've been on teams where they have leveraged data analytics just by using an Excel spreadsheet, right? So that is kind of the start to that. And then you can get into other areas where they are leveraging Python scripts to perform their data analytics. You have also, I've been on teams that heavily leveraged SQL queries. So SQL was used to obtain, gather all of the data, and also to build out all of the case statements that were used to then test each of those business requirements. And then that was fed into a visualization tool. Those being Tableau, Power BI, whatever your team currently has access to, as a way for the audit team, the financial audit team, or management to easily consume the results of those tests.
Now, so if there is no standard tool, is there a usefulness to create a standard tool? And the second question is, if each of the teams are operating at a different level, meaning, some people write it in Python, some people write it in Java, whatever it is, but there must be some standard framework to say these are the X number of things that you need to validate for an industry, right? So like when we do a test case validation, we have a whole bunch of test cases to make sure it meets the requirements. So which means the requirements need to be defined, and then we go after the requirements to create all the test cases, and we see how much of coverage those test cases cover the requirements. Now, if each of the company is doing its own stuff, there is no standard to say, yes, we covered 50% or 60% of fraud detection, right?
Yes, so that is heavily reliant on your audit plan, first off. Every year, you kind of take an inventory of the things that you want to test. There are requirements, mostly from those heavily regulated industries, where you have to test certain things on a yearly basis. So those are always at the top. And then you start getting into those internal controls. So those are basically management's rules to how their department or their area should be working to meet best practices and for their departments to work as efficiently as possible. So then how you're building those audit tests is directly tied to those regulations and those internal controls, how those are specifically laid out.
So I guess there is some sort of a standard document that says, here is all the things that industry needs to validate, number one. And then you go after that, once it's validated, you go after the policy of the company to see what are the things that we need to test, and then you build towards those things, right? That's what my understanding is from what you're saying. Okay.
Yes. Again, based on that audit plan, that's why those risk assessments are so important, because you want to identify within your company what's the highest risk to the company losing money, getting breached, etc., right? So you want to make sure that those areas that are critical to the business are at the top of the priority to get audited.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Great question.
That's good.
This has all been very, very informative because I don't think I even think about auditing as much because I think, oh, that's just more what I imagine an accountant is doing. I imagine like, you know, and I don't really often come across the thought about, or just like in the conversation about like how AI is about to change this entire field. Um, so what are your last few thoughts on just like the future of auditing and AI and analyzing this data? And I love talking about data. That's like one of my favorite things. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. I am also a huge data nerd, so I can talk about data all day long. But yeah, I'm very excited to see the progression of audit. I'm already excited to see the progression that audit has had from when I first started out and just leveraging data analytics as that baseline foundational, and then getting into leveraging these AI technologies. I'm excited to see these statistics increase and decrease where they need to, and I hope to be able to be more exposed to the world of analytics, and hopefully as a consultant be able to help out folks that maybe need, you know, assistance or strategic advice into how to leverage these technologies to make their lives easier.
Can I ask one more question? I know we have 5 minutes. We should wrap
Absolutely.
up the Deepika. It's okay. Thank you. I have heard about auditing, like external auditing companies use AI. You said that you work in IT auditing. Is there a difference between the IT auditing and the auditors auditing like PwC?
Yes. Okay, so IT auditing is a specific like what you are testing, right? So you have financial auditors. Those are the ones that are going out and testing things like the revenue fraud. And then the IT auditors specifically have their own little realm based on the technologies, right? So we're the ones going out and making sure that the password configurations are set to best practices, the change management, like the code changes to the systems. So it's just more heavily related to the IT systems. We focus a lot of what are called ITGCs, those IT general controls, whereas the financial auditors really work a lot more with, say, like the audit department and all of like the financial statement, the financial side of the house. But both of those exist at PwC or, you know, whatever, Big Four. It's just the type of audits that you're performing.
So is there a difference in the AI? I mean, I remember I was teaching this Glean AI course recently, and they were talking very much about we're getting you access to all the data, so now you can chat with the data or you can query the data, right? To and understand that and make AI draw insights from your corporate data. But then they were very, very particular about how they are in compliance with all the data best practices. And one of them was this access control. So I'm just curious about how an AI system or like an LLM system is coming in and looking at this, but you're already looking at it from an IT data analytics perspective before the AI touches it.
So can you rephrase the question part of that?
So my question is, there are too many people trying to, different stakeholders, right? There are different
Yes.
stakeholders in the company who are trying to access the same data using AI. So so I'm wondering whether when IT is doing this, is their goal about cybersecurity and risk management different from and Glean AI or some system like that, which is saying, hey, users, come access the data and you can chat with it to draw insights so you can do your job. So, are there too many different AI systems already operating on the same data in the companies?
There might be, and I think that is one of the audits that audit teams are looking into. So when, say, that's another IT audit project, right? So access. As an individual employee, you should be practicing least privileges, right? So you should only have access to the systems with which you are required to perform the duties of your job, right? now that these AI systems are kind of working as employees, I suppose, as well, we have to make sure that those are connected to systems and that they should be connected to. So again, with the Copilot example, the Copilot instance that the audit team is using is something completely separate than a Copilot instance that maybe the entire company has access to, because of the fact that there is that delineation of independence that the audit team needs to obtain.
Beautiful. That you answered my question. Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Good question. Good question.
I added Monica's course here on chat because people can see the chat only from when they
Yeah.
join. So we added that earlier, I believe. So I've
Yes.
just added it here. I'll also add it in Business School of AI on LinkedIn. So if people come back and ask follow-up questions, maybe they can see the course too.
Oh, thank you, Sudha. I mean, this is great. I see a lot of potential in standardizing, or maybe having a standalone product if it doesn't exist, and maybe create something out of it. So because there's so much of potential in what you've shared, I think. So that's great to learn, actually.
Yeah, this
Yes.
was a
To
really
add to that, there are products, there are audit products out there, such as Audit Board, that kind of works as an audit control center, if that's what you want to kind of think of it as, where it controls the audit findings and the communication to the stakeholders, et cetera. So there are those types of products, but that's something kind of separate than the testing itself.
Yeah, so I was meaning more on the testing front,
Okay,
mainly
okay.
because of the wealth of information that each of these audit processes go through.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is not standardized, maybe there is some way we can bring it all together, I think. I
Yes.
think, yeah. So this is great learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was amazing, and we are just about at time. So, like, honestly, perfect. I do see some people have joined at just now. We are at 9 a.m. PT. And also in New York, we're at 12 p.m. PST. I'm sorry, EST, because of the time change. I think a lot of people are a little off. So, thank you so much again, Monica. This was so interesting. Yeah, like I think that since we always at the Business School of AI and WeeklyWed, we always talk about AI, but we never talk really into like the auditing world. And so to bring this whole other side to us, now we're going to look at it from an AI lens. And so thank you so much for being here. This was an amazing conversation. And all of our learners, as you've been hearing, like everyone here is mostly a professional and would love to just like take a little time out of their day to learn something new. So thank you for bringing this to us.
Yes, and thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Deepika, can I add one thing? Especially this week, we are going to have more people. I see people from Europe coming in now at 10. Unfortunately, we have to let the speaker go. She's given us 1 hour already. I tried to add some comments at our post at Business School of AI. So, Monica, would you be kind enough to come if we have people posting questions? Would you be able to come and add some comment or answers for us?
Do you want
On
me to
Business
switch
School of
over to
AI.
YouTube?
Yeah, on LinkedIn,
Oh,
and
okay, yeah,
in our
absolutely, yes.
community. Yes,
Hmm.
awesome. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so for those of you joining late, sorry to have missed you, but maybe you can add a comment at Business School of AI on LinkedIn. I tried to add some notes thinking about you guys specifically today, so maybe that is helpful. So thank you so much. I also wanted to share the link for WeeklyWed Pro in case people want to get a sample. So we'll add some clips that LM will make some clips from this session. And so you'll get a sample if you want to give your email in there. Thank you, guys.
perfect. And the recording will be available here. Yeah, so we recorded it and we will send out some clips and stuff. So thank you everyone for being here. Monica, once again, thank you so much. This was so great. And please join us next week. We will also be talking about something cool again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.